From Chicago's Can TV, a look at the week's events is reported in the newspapers, in the blogs and online, and on radio and TV. This is Chicago Newsroom.
And hello again. Welcome once again to Chicago Newsroom right here on Can TV. I'm Ken Davis. Glad to have you back with us for another week. It's been an eventful week, but the kind of week where we get to actually sort of pull back a little bit and look at the big picture stuff. So we've invited some excellent big picture people to come and hang out with us today on the program. I'm referring to Whitney Woodward, who is with us from the Illinois Campaign for Political Reform, an organization that was very busily involved in all this stuff we were talking about last week with the ward remaps, which Dick Mell would have you say is settled, but you think maybe it's not quite as settled as, well, we're going to find out from Whitney anyway. We have the editorial page editor of the Chicago Sun-Times with us today, Tom McNamee, back on the show again. Tom, glad to have you here today. And we also have Paul Meincke here from Channel 7, a face that needs no introduction to people who watch television, I'm sure. I've been doing Channel 7 for a long time. And there's a lot going on. But I do want to start by saying, Tom, that we invited you on the program about, I don't know, about a month ago or something. Right. It's been a while that we've had you, because our show needs to book way in advance, and then we get people committed. No, really, you have to come. And Tom had agreed to be on the show, and since then you've made some news as editorial page editor of the Chicago Sun-Times. The Sun-Times the other day had this thing called, this headline, New Direction for Election Editorials.
I wrote that.
You wrote that yourself?
Those words.
Wow. See, isn't that cool? Look at that. Here's the Sun-Times, and here's the guy who wrote it. Wow. Well, anyway.
Multifaceted.
Yeah, that's right. So, in a nutshell, the Sun-Times has decided...
The Sun-Times has decided not to do endorsements in political races, which was a very difficult decision. It wasn't made by me specifically, it was made by the company. And, but I'm on board with it, you know what I mean? I mean, we have, and it's very important, interesting thing, it's not just the Sun-Times. All of the Sun-Times newspapers, I think, are doing this. The Southtown had the same editorial, frankly. They ran the same editorial yesterday, saying they're no longer doing endorsements, and I think it's going to be true of the other papers too. The Sun-Times owns a lot of papers. So it's a company-wide decision. Their feeling was, we have a new ownership, which thank God. The whole idea here of the previous ownership was to get us set up to be bought by somebody after coming out of bankruptcy. And this group of Chicago investors who seem to be very committed to the place, they felt, I think as a group, or perhaps maybe Tim Knight, their top guy, hired man, having been the publisher of Newsday, he said after all of his experience, his feeling was that editorial endorsements tend to create a sense in the public's eyes that newspapers are biased, politically biased. And editorials in general can do that. You don't want to get rid of editorials. You have to be a force and a voice in your community. Something about endorsements specifically have that power. So the decision was made, we talked about it, that we would not do endorsements, knowing there's a downside. There's no perfect world here. I especially feel bad for people in the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District. That's a place where people would like to get a little more guidance. But you know, it was one decision or the other, one way to go to the other. So I mean, it is fair to say that because we see this happening across all the papers, that this is something that was driven by the new ownership, which is utterly their right. They own the property. I think that's fair to say. I mean, anybody can see that if every paper in the Sun-Times operation is doing this,
suddenly made this
it wasn't specifically my idea, which is not to say I'm not on board with it. I'm totally fine with it. I mean, you can make arguments either way. But I think what I like most, I like the idea that we have these new owners who have very clear ideas about what they want to do, and they're not standing still. I mean, in the last week,
well, you know, this is interesting you mentioned this, because we actually talked a little bit yesterday, and I was pointing out that if you have any doubt about the fact that the Sun-Times is under new ownership, just take a look at something like this. Look at the look at Snead now. You know, when
looks terrific, and that's what the ad on the page. Yesterday's was better.
Right. When the Sun-Times moved over to Tribune to print the paper, one of the things that your guys said was that they were going to be able to exploit color more fully, which we haven't really seen that much up to now. But it looks like this Tim Knight guy.
It looks like they
knows how
found a way to
use
bring color.
so you're seeing a very different look to the layout and the feel of the paper, and this is only after about a week or something. So you're starting to see these.
And the other thing I like about it, and this, I'm not trying to sound too promotional about it, but I've been at the Sun-Times off and on for a long time. I really love the paper, and I love being in the newspaper business. The other thing I like about this is I like the fact that these new owners, although they're really a media company, their interest is not just to have a paper product, but to have a media content company, and they'll get that media out, that information out to you wherever they can find it. You know, they'll get it into your Blackberries, they'll get it into your Twitters. You know,
which has got to be done.
But what I think is interesting is that they're also interested in the paper product. I mean, I frankly didn't know they'd be so completely directly interested in things like fixing Sneed's column, making it look better. I thought their interest would be so much in the electronic end of things that I wouldn't see that. So it's kind of nice.
So you've had a lot of reaction to this, I assume.
Across the board, you know, about to the not doing endorsements. Yeah, across the board, and I didn't know what it would be. I was surprised to find that an awful lot of people thought it was a good idea, and an awful lot of people thought it was a good idea. I thought perhaps they would be more critical. People tend to express themselves when they don't like something. And this idea has been getting it across the board. What I would say, though, Ken, is it seems to me that if you're a hardcore Republican, you think it's a brilliant idea. And if you're a real lefty then you think, what is the Sun-Times doing? Which kind of reflects the view that the Sun-Times is more of a centrist to left paper.
Well, I mean, one thing that this is not a question. This is just a statement from the host, and others can join in on this if you like too. I find myself pretty much like you, kind of like basically on board with this idea, because let's face it. I mean, even though I'm speaking to the editorial page editor, your august editorial board is not going to persuade too many Chicagoans that they shouldn't vote for Mitt Romney, they should vote for Barack Obama, or vice versa, or who to vote for senator. So really it doesn't matter that much, but
3%.
3%?
1% if a paper's in a presidential race. There was a study came out of Northeastern University in Boston just this summer. In a presidential race, if the endorsement goes counter to what people expect, so for instance, if the Tribune were to endorse Barack Obama, the conservative paper going, about 3%, they say, of your readers will be influenced enough, perhaps change their vote.
Wow, really? That's more than I would have guessed.
3%. But if you endorse according to what their expectations are, then it's 1%.
Oh, it's 1%. Okay, yeah. But anyway, and then we'll get off of this because we got a lot of things to talk about today. But the one thing that really does bother me about this, and Whitney, I don't know, I have a feeling maybe you have a thought about this too, is that we have so many people on our ballot who are down ballot in, you know, like your state representative. And the newspapers can be very helpful in that, in saying, you know, the guy who represents you, in our judgment, is not doing a very good job. We think you should go for this woman because she's better. And you've never heard of either of them. Or, as you said, Water Reclamation District, an incredibly important group that does dramatically important work, but nobody knows who the commissioners are. And, you know, so I'm a little disappointed that you're walking away from that. But
I think that's a valid point. I think the down ballot races endorsements are more important to people, and they tend to be less partisan also.
Yeah. Well,
but
and that's also,
and I think when the company made that decision, once again it was a group decision, that was acknowledged. Nobody's pretending that there isn't a downside. They just felt the upside was more important.
The part that I don't get about it, Tom, is that is the part of the endorsement process that does not make you particularly partisan. I mean, if you tell me that you think that I should not vote for my incumbent state rep and vote for somebody else, I don't think of that as being like a Democratic or liberal or, you know, conservative thing. But anyway, okay.
Actually, Deborah Shore, who's on the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District and who is running again, wrote an eloquent letter to me making that point. So really? I think it's valid.
Yeah.
And further to that note, I think the editorial specifically mentioned one of the downsides is that voters have a lot of difficulty accessing information about judges.
Absolutely
candidates for judge, and I think that that's very true, and that kind of speaks to the fact that right now there isn't enough information being given to voters, enough credible information about, you know, what are the qualities that, one, a voter should be looking for in a candidate for judge, and two, whether or not those seeking your vote have those qualifications.
Well, that's something you guys must have to worry about all the time.
And we're actually in the middle of surveying all candidates running for judge, asking them for some information about their academic background, their civic affiliation, and also asking them a couple of open-ended questions just to give them a chance to articulate to voters their position about you know, justice and their understanding of the law, and hopefully give voters a little bit of a glimpse into kind of what their mindset is and how they formulate arguments and that sort of thing.
Paul, what I consider to be big news today, or yesterday, recently, this deal that we might actually see cameras in the circuit courts. I mean, that, to me, that's huge. Where did that story come from? I didn't even know it was being
Well, it's been 3
considered.
decades in the making.
Yes, I know,
Except
but I thought that was...
everybody was stunned that it all of a sudden popped up.
Well,
now,
that's,
Tim
yeah.
Evans, who's the chief judge in Cook County, has spoken in favor of it. And Thomas Kilbride, the Chief Justice on the Supreme Court, has also lobbied hard and lobbied his fellow justices to let it happen. But then all of a sudden, here it is.
Yeah.
And it's going to happen if the individual circuits apply to make it happen. And the news I thought from earlier this week was that Tim Evans is on board immediately, saying, show me the application.
Right.
Now this is an enormous process with ground rules that have to be set up in courtrooms that are dark and dreary and not very big, and you can't put up lights, and you have to apply in advance to get permission to bring in a camera. So there's just an enormous number of rules that have to be put into place, and there'll be a birthing process. But it's gone on in other states for many years. We are one of 14 states that do not now have cameras in the courts.
Tom, you guys editorialized?
Yeah, you know what we said was it was sort of rolled out a couple of days ago as a pilot program, an experiment. And what we wrote was, you don't need an experiment, you don't need a pilot program. That's been done by half the states in this country or more. We know it works. What you need is you need to roll it out slowly to make sure that we do the best practices, so it's done in the right way. And I guess they're modeling it after Iowa.
Yeah, I think that's what they mean when they say pilot, because
Yeah,
if you have a
make,
pilot, you're going to have some rules. There's going to be somebody reviewing offenders and some endpoint where you say, okay, the pilot's done, it works or it doesn't. Well, there isn't any time frame, and there isn't really any review other than the justices themselves getting anecdotal information or the real deal about it started in Cook County, this is what happened over this period of time, and we think it works, or it doesn't.
We're just going to encourage a psychic shift. This is not a pilot, folks. This is for real.
This
It's
is
here.
real.
It's not going away,
Yeah.
and we'll do it right. And we take the position, and I think most media people would, that this is very, very good.
Yeah.
I heard while I was stuck in traffic this morning on the way here, listening to Anita Alvarez on the radio saying that she has reservations. She might be in favor, but she's not thinking that it might not be the best idea.
Did she say what her concern was?
What's the problem?
I'm embarrassed to say I can't really remember.
You're shifting lanes.
Yeah, well, I sort of tuned in the middle of this, but my point only was just that not everybody is completely on board with this the way I would expect media folks to be on board.
Well, the traditional long-standing argument is that the defense attorney will showboat to the camera and justice will get second fiddle.
Right, right.
And I don't think that's not been demonstrated. There's some of that. There's always going to be. There's theater in the courtroom. There has to be.
Well, that's the judge's job, don't you think?
Right. Well, and like Paul said, I think the devil is in the details in terms of how this initiative goes forward. I think there is kind of a risk, not only of attorneys perhaps showboating, but also with televising courtrooms that people might start to liken judges more to other sorts of candidates, and might have this understanding, not having any legal background, that what they're seeing, which probably bears no resemblance to, say, Judge Judy or Law and Order, that what if they disagree, that then they're going to vote that judge out of office? Perhaps that judge is just following the letter of the law. So I think there needs to be some education. Obviously, we're in support of transparency initiatives, and think that this is interesting that the court is going forward with this. But
Paul, from just a nuts and bolts matter as a TV guy, not every court, even if it's available, not every court is going to be covered by TV, right? I mean, it's just going to be spot news.
We don't have enough people to do
right,
that.
I mean,
there's not enough people. It'll be a pool arrangement. They would allow under the rules proposed 2 cameras, 2 stills and 2 video cameras. There's not room for that in a lot of courtrooms. And we really don't need 2, you need 1.
Right.
And then it would be a pool arrangement. So there's just not the people to do that, and we would select, as we do now, those types of trials we want to cover.
So I mean, the vast majority of trials no TVs
No.
are going to be there.
No.
And there are exemptions for what, for juvenile cases?
You don't no child adoption cases, no divorce, no juvenile, and then other things that
No
are
domestic
self-evident.
violence.
Yeah, no
Domestic
domestic violence.
violence, I
You
was-
don't shoot an informant, and you don't take pictures of the jury.
Right, right.
Except, I suppose, when the verdict comes in, when the foreperson stands and reads, I think maybe that would be allowed. I don't know. But you don't, voir dire, out of the mix. You don't shoot that either.
Well, it's going to be very interesting to watch and to see if, again, without being too critical of television, the fact that video is available might make more trials more interesting to some news shops.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. So,
If-
so you might see more coverage of the courts because
well,
of this.
the,
Whether that's
you know,
good
the
or
big
bad.
trial where it would have been great would have been Blagojevich,
Well,
but that's
yeah,
the federal
that's
court, and that's not
They're
happening.
not going to allow it, right? Yeah, yeah. Mike Madigan made a rare public appearance the other day. I mean, it's something that, you know, just like the Pope coming and speaking or something. And he spoke at Elmhurst College and said, among other things, that the quote was, "I never found anybody who could tell me why the state of Illinois stepped up one day and said, okay, school districts, we'll just pick up your pension costs," as a way of saying that the state should probably not be paying a lot of the pension costs for schools.
Madigan said that?
Yeah, he said that
Missed
yesterday.
that.
Or a
I
couple
saw
days
that
ago.
story about all the things he said about the governors, but I missed
Yeah,
that point.
yeah, and he also mentioned about the pension thing. But are we to take anything from this? Does this mean that maybe the state is going to start trying to walk away from school pensions? We don't know.
You know, I think Mike
There's
Madigan.
silence.
I think Mike Madigan he very seldom says anything in a way that isn't well thought out. I mean,
Yeah, yeah, that doesn't
He's
presage
deliberative.
in my
something.
experience, he's deliberative. That's the
Right.
word I'm looking for.
Right.
And so I think he's on to, and he did the same thing when he started flagging to the unions that we're going to have a two-tier pension system where new
Yeah.
employees would get less. And when they didn't hear the hints and when they wouldn't come to the table, he just did it. He did it late at night one night. I happened to be in Springfield that night. It was really something to see. And I think this might be and he's really on to a very important issue. The issue is that the state is the one that pays these pensions. It's through a state pension system, but it is the local school boards that decide how much you get.
Yeah, right.
And that's a real disconnect. You don't have to pay it.
Yeah.
The state pays it. It makes it very easy to take a guy who's been with her for 25 years, top executive for the school district, and in his last 2 years, you sort of bump him up in salary so he gets a much better pension, knowing fully well that to a large extent, the cost is not going to be borne by your taxpayers district-wide, but by the state. So that's a problem that needs to be addressed, and it's good to see that he's on it.
So this is a smoke signal to school districts then?
It sure we were talking last week about shots across the bow that our mayor does all the time. This sounds like another one of those shots. Well, anyway, we'll just have to kind of wait and see what happens on that one. But it's not unlike capital funds who go in and buy companies and dump all the pensions on the federal government. It's kind of a similar thing. If you don't have to actually pay it, it's easier to. Anyway, Whitney, we didn't get a chance we had you scheduled for last week's show when we had this table completely cluttered up with all these maps, which I brought back just for nostalgia's sake. But we would have believed, we had Elizabeth Brackett from Channel 11 on the show, and she had her BlackBerry sitting on the table, and they called us at 10:15 or sometime when we were taping the show and said, guess what, Mel's thing just passed. So one would have it believe that this is a settled matter, but I don't think it is a settled matter because at least one group is now standing up and saying they don't think this map is going to work.
Yeah, there are a lot of questions about the map, and there are a lot of questions because nobody really got a chance to see the map until it was already passed.
Details. You guys, you do-gooders, you're always so worried about stuff like that. Alderman Mel knows what he's doing, and he did the right thing, I'm sure.
You know, I think Chicagoans have seen a lot of closed-door deals in the past, and whenever that happens, it always kind of begs the question, what is there to hide? You're right. 24 hours before we were scheduled to chat last week, we find out that there's a hearing, and the rumor mill is there might be a vote on a map, and so I show up at City Hall at 10 a.m. and Alderman Mel makes a note that they're copying the map in the back, and soon it will be distributed to aldermen. And
So let's vote.
Yes. And poor Susana Mendoza, the city clerk, or the clerk, is tweeting saying, we'll be posting the map as soon as we can. We just don't have a copy of it yet. It wasn't posted online until, 2 or 3 hours after the vote was taken.
Well, she shouldn't have been wasting time tweeting. She should have been getting the map up online.
She was waiting for it.
Well, but now we hear that the Latino Policy Forum is basically saying that this notion that there are 13 Hispanic majority wards is really not true by their analysis. Do you buy that?
I will leave the details up to the lawyers and the experts in the field. My group, ICPR, has been working with the Latino Policy Forum and a number of other groups in a coalition known as the Illinois Campaign for Accountable Redistricting. And basically, even though we represent different constituents, have different interests in this process, we're united in our interest for transparency and public engagement, because that serves everyone's interest, regardless of what community you live in or what's your background. And I think we were all very shocked and outraged that we weren't given an opportunity to weigh in on this map before it was a done deal. Back in November, the City Council unanimously approved a resolution calling for transparency and accountability in the process, and outlining a number of steps that it was going to take, as this thing went forward, to engage the public and to inform them. And when push came to shove, we saw the same, song and dance that we've seen in past decades.
Well, there was transparency and involvement all the way up to the very end when the decision was made.
All the way up to the point where it matters.
Well, okay, welcome to Chicago.
If I just may, when you talk about that, I totally agree with you, by the way. It wasn't done. It was kind of shoved through in the last minute. I think editorial, if we had written an editorial, which we didn't, we would agree with you totally. I'm not sure it makes any difference. I remember when, if we'd had the proper procedures, the proper hearings and whatnot, when the state did this, Cindy Canary's group, Campaign for Reform, they were very successful in getting the state to have hearings all over the place and look at this state remap and that state remap. These are state legislative districts in congressional. And they did all of that stuff, and then at the last minute they did exactly what they did in Chicago. Madigan and the other members of the top leadership sat down and cut a deal and came up with a map that made a lot of people very unhappy.
Yes,
it very gerrymandered. And the lesson to me was, wow, we even had the right process. It was done above board, and at the last minute, raw political interest still carried the day, still carried the day. It was still about, I want my district to be right so I can get reelected.
I think that's, to be quasi-serious about this for a moment, I think that's one of the great lessons that we've learned from the Daley dynasty, is that you can actually fake good public process as long as you keep them out of the way at that last 5 minutes.
It's the appearance of transparency.
We are committed to the appearance of transparency.
There you go.
Right.
Well, and I think what you're getting at is that right now the redistricting process at both the state level and at the city level it gives the power of elected officials who have a vested interest in the outcome of their districts to control the process. And what we saw at the state during the state redistricting process, I think I spoke to 10 or 11 committees throughout the process asking for transparency and asking for those hearings and specifying that the most important component is giving any draft map a real thorough public vetting. And although the state process made some steps forward, at least compared to past decades, when push came to shove, the final map was approved within a week. And any sort of criteria that was used in the development of those districts was never given to the public. And so I would assume that incumbency and political interests played a significant role in the production of both the state districts and unfortunately the city.
So we have to somehow take it out of their hands a little bit?
Yeah, we've seen a couple of states go forward in this. California is the latest example. It requires a lot of effort, but I think looking at these wards, a lot of people are going to be scratching their heads trying to figure out who their alderman is, why this changed, and
Well, I was commenting last week that one of the things one of the maps actually, I live up in the 38th ward up on the northwest side, and one of the maps actually put the 43rd up there, and I was saying this is the greatest thing that's ever happened. I could move to the 43rd ward without having to spend all the money. Anyway, Paul,
property values just jumped.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, one of the things that when we called you and asked you to be on the show, partly it was because this report that you had done on Channel 7 about the city settling on this 2003 thing. It sounds like just a kind of another one of these little stories that washes over you, but it's really significant, and I'd like to have you just kind of give us the background on this. What happened?
It's not settled yet. It's significant because of the dollar amount And it's also significant because it reflects a dramatic change in police policy in governing crowds. So it's hard to believe this was 9 years ago, but it was the anti-Iraq war march at the beginning of the war. Amazing.
This is the thing
A
up
large
on
group
Michigan
of
Avenue,
people,
right?
well, they gathered in the Federal Plaza to begin with. They did not have a permit. The police allowed them to gather, and when they started to march, they marched to Lakeshore Drive, and the police allowed that to happen because they thought, why stop them? It could get ugly. Let's give them some latitude. So they went north. They got all the way up to Chicago, and they made a turn, and the police were fearful that they were going to turn and go south on Michigan and start damaging property. So they basically corralled them, hundreds and hundreds of people, many of whom said on tape captured by people who were shooting, by police, I want to go home. Let me go home.
By police's own video.
Yeah, police department video. We want to leave. Please let us go. They even chanted that, please let us go. And they didn't, and there were over 500 arrests. Those people then sued, 2 class action suits, one that's reached a tentative agreement with a small group, 16, and a much larger group with over 500 people. Some of these people were jailed, held overnight, missed work, so they're going to get damages. And there's no good way to determine the damages right now, but we're thinking like north of $7–8 million that the city of Chicago is going to pay to people who were encompassed in this demonstration.
But there's some evidence that the police might have maybe learned a lesson from that?
Yes, for sure. And what they have referred to now as we look ahead to G8 and NATO is look at what we did with Occupy. There was a reasoned approach to the whole thing. Some of the protesters even wore color-coded bands that said, you know, I'm here and I want to be arrested so you can take me away. The others said, let me go, I'm not going to be arrested. I'm not so sure that's the way it's going to work for G8 and NATO. Nobody's going to come in from out of town wearing color-coded bands. But the whole notion is that you give latitude, but that you do have permits. You do have, and this is the most important thing that Judge Posner said in his appeals court ruling, you have to be clear and direct to the crowd. You have to say, you must now disperse or we will arrest you, and that was not done in 2003.
I have to say, as someone who actually was covering that, the Occupy thing back in October, that boy, the police couldn't have been more explicit. I mean, they had gigantic loudspeakers and they were saying, you know, in 15 minutes we will, no, we really will, you know, start. So anyway.
So that was the lesson learned, but now the price will have to be paid for not having done that 9 years ago.
Right, I see, okay. I think we have maybe 30 seconds left. Mary Dempsey. What about Mary Dempsey at the Chicago Public Library? Was she fired? Did she have to go? What happened? Anybody have any insights? We got like a few seconds.
My insight comes by way of Fran Spielman's story this morning, which is to say that the time was right for her to go, that she did not appreciate the way the mayor has handled the transition, the cutbacks, and it was time to go.
Yeah. Well, it's a big story, what's going on with the libraries.
It's a disappointment, though, because Mary Dempsey really has been one of the best department administrators the city has had for a long time.
I agree
Absolutely
with that.
top drawer.
I agree with
Fabulous
that completely.
administrator.
Yeah, yeah. That's going to have to leave it. That's where we're going to have to leave it right now here on Chicago Newsroom for another week. Interesting discussion, though, and I'm really glad that we had our friends here today. Tom McNamee from the Chicago Sun-Times, Paul Meincke, of course, from Channel 7, Whitney Woodward with the Illinois Campaign for Political Reform. Thank you so much all for being here. We'll have you back again sometime soon, I hope. You have been watching Chicago Newsroom. It's a community service of CAN TV, and you can see this and all the other programs on Access Network right here on CAN TV, but you can also see them online at cantv.blip. at cantv.blip.tv. They always tell me, you can't say that. You can't get it out, can you? Check us out right there to subscribe to us on iTunes, and we'll see you next week. I'm Ken Davis. Thanks for watching. Bye.